Hey, 42 here. In late 2019, Empire magazine ran an interview with Martin Scorsese that, for a brief moment, set the internet on fire. Discussing Scorsese's filmmaking history, the great director was asked for his opinion on the current state of cinema, in particular the Marvel Cinematic Universe. His response angered a lot of people. Equating Marvel movies to theme park rides, he stated they aren't cinema, and went on to say they aren't the cinema of human beings trying to convey emotional, physiological experiences to another human being. This is, of course, a nice way of saying they're at best shallow entertainment, at worst nonsense, only good for watching when you want to put your brain into sleep mode. When it came to putting in the effort to watch these kinds of movies, the best he could muster was a mere, "I tried." The response was fairly emphatic. People argued on the news. The head of Disney was so angered he arranged to meet up with Scorsese to convince him he was wrong. Various actors and film industry professionals commented, but Scorsese doubled down, stating in the New York Times that the Marvel movies were devoid of genuine revelation, mystery, emotional danger, and that nothing was at risk, and they were inhospitable to art. So in general, statements were flying this way, that way, and all over the place. And you know what? Scorsese was right. But he was right in perhaps more ways than he knew, or even liked to admit. Modern cinema, especially that encapsulated by the MCU and similar franchises, does suck. We've gone from the thought-provoking visual masterpieces of the Godfather trilogy, Citizen Kane, A Clockwork Orange, and Apocalypse Now, and hundreds of others that, each in their own way, advanced the cinematic medium and artistic human achievement, to modern tropes such as Transformers, White Chicks, 50 Shades, Cats, and, dare I speak its name, the Emoji Movie, and an absolute slew of endless animated and superhero franchises that hand us terrible sequel after terrible prequel after terrible spin-off. Occasional gems do surface from the cesspit, just to name a selection of my personal favourite recent releases. Of course, yours may differ. The Grand Budapest Hotel, Darkest Hour, Joker, almost everything by Christopher Nolan, and much by the Coen brothers, and Scorsese's own The Irishman. But on the whole, cinema is in a very dark place right now, and has been for some time. Now, a lot of this video may come across as the grumblings of someone whose generation is being replaced with a younger one with different, more spandex-laden tastes. I'm man enough to admit that it's been shown that there's a certain age your tastes in music set in stone. So, it's perfectly possible it's the same for movies, and therefore, my tastes are just set in the past, and I'll never get what all the fuss is about. So, maybe I'm just a mustache curmudgeon who can't get with the times. That's possibly true. No, it's definitely true. Don't get me wrong, when I watch modern blockbusters, I do enjoy them. I feel a thrill. As Scorsese suggested, it's as if I'm on a ride in an amusement park. I laugh, anticipate, and sometimes shed a tear, and it's all good fun. However, I certainly don't find myself salivating at the prospect of seeing another one, nor do I derive any deeper meaning from them. So maybe it's just me. Or maybe, just maybe, the movie industry has been debased to a deluge of detritus, and my viewpoint has some veracity, and I'll tell you why I think this is. The way I see it, there are two main reasons why modern movies are, on the whole, fairly awful, and those are business and storytelling. For simplicity, I'm going to split this video into these two sections. Let's start with business. First, we need to establish how the movie business has now become an almost perfect engine for producing garbage. Why? Because every element of it is designed to do exactly that. Rather than make something spectacular, the movie industry is inherently inclined to make something mediocre. And more often than not, that's exactly what they aim for, because mediocrity sells. There are several reasons why mediocrity is actually the industry-wide goal. One of the most glaring and absurd is that movies are frequently made for no other reason than to preserve the rights to characters. Characters are essentially assets that can be utilised by the company, i.e. Disney or Sony, to produce income. If the company does not use the character in a film, the rights to that character often revert, meaning they lose the asset. Ever wonder why there was a Hellraiser movie that was filmed in just 2 weeks? Countless Spider-Man reboots, Fantastic Four reboots, or even, insanely, a Jason Bourne movie that didn't actually star Jason Bourne. The studio wanted to put something out to preserve the rights, and in the latter case Matt Damon was busy. So, bafflingly, we got some other guy who wasn't Jason Bourne. Am I the only one who thinks that's insane? These movies are made essentially in the hope that keeping the rights will pay off later down the line. In the meantime, here's your crappy, half-assed movie. Enjoy. Or not, we don't care. Characters should operate as artistic apparatus that aid storytelling, express meaningful emotion, and ultimately add depth to the movie experience, enabling the viewer to connect with it on a more personal level. But today, characters are just base assets that can be monetized. No, actually, it's more than that. Characters are now entire brands. Characters like Batman, James Bond, Harry Potter, or Superman are brands that in and of themselves bring in hundreds of millions of dollars through games, merchandising, licensing, toys, and films. Spider-Man, the most popular superhero in the world, brings in over $1 billion. In other words, these characters are as profitable to their parent companies as Air Jordans are to Nike or the iPhone is to Apple. Think about that for a second. And there's nothing wrong with these characters becoming brands so long as the quality of the movies doesn't suffer. But it's essential that these brands are kept alive in the public consciousness to keep them earning money and keep those assets profitable. How do you do that? Through a constant bombardment of new, mediocre movies. It's also imperative that these brands, as the ad agency Young and Rubicam declared, become the new religion, which is something I'll leave you to process. But given the vitriol Martin Scorsese was subjected to, I'd say Marvel, at the very least, have been very successful at spawning a devout following. If I'm being cynical, this is no doubt one of the motivations behind the shared universe craze that has gripped movie studios in the last decade. If you take a gamble on audiences responding positively to a brand new character, you can buffer the audience's expectations by inserting an already well-known character brand into the narrative. That way, you get a new and existing audience all in one go, regardless of whether it benefits the story in any way. For example, Batman v Superman was rammed full of tacked-on superhero introductions. Spider-Man 2, not the recent sequel, or the Tobey Maguire one. The other one, no, not the animated one. The one with the guy with the long neck. Yeah, that one. That Spider-Man 2 tried to set up a universe of villains. Tom Cruise's The Mummy tried to set up a universe of monsters. The issue was that none of the producers stopped to think, perhaps we should actually make this one a decent movie. Why? Characters equals assets, equals brands, equals franchises, equals money, money, money. But why do all studios these days have to be like this? Why is it always the same regurgitated recipe? Well, movies are an incredible financial risk, complete with thousands of moving parts that are incredibly unlikely to succeed. You can have a great director and great actors, but if the script sucks, you're going nowhere. You can have a great script, but if the marketing blows, you'll get no return, and so on. It's incredibly easy to fail. So Hollywood has become extremely adept at predicting what works and sticking to it. Don't take my word for it, here's Fight Club director David Fincher talking about movie making within the studio system. He said, if you want to make studio movies, you stay in their lanes, which are romantic comedy, affliction Oscar bait, spandex summer, superhero tentpole, moderately budgeted sequel. And aside from how hilarious affliction Oscar bait is, That shows how constricted the largest engine of movie making, the studio system, has become. And more often than not, filmmakers need these kinds of engines or their idea won't see the light of day. Filmmaking is an incredibly expensive art form. Unlike almost all the others, it requires hundreds of thousands, if not hundreds of millions, to see a vision come to life. Where novelists need a vocabulary, persistence, and a word processor, filmmakers need a crew of hundreds and a blank check. So it's completely understandable why most movies end up being samey, repetitive rubbish. They have no choice but to be, from a financial perspective, and if the studio is fronting the cash, why shouldn't they make good on their investment? I'd want to. The poor sod whose original idea the film was, has to let the studio tear it apart and feed it into their brand creation, mass market, money-making machine, because the alternative is that the film doesn't get made. But for the film lovers out there like you and me, we get utter trash year after year. But don't worry, it gets worse, because the market itself has changed, and it's had some ugly consequences. You see, in the past, when it came to film, there was America and a few smaller international markets, but America was by far the biggest single market. If America didn't like a movie, it tended to flop. Now, however, things have seriously changed. China's market size is rapidly on the rise, rivaling America's, and this means one thing. If a movie is going to ensure its financial success, it needs to translate across many different cultures. This means intellectually and morally complex, dialogue-heavy plots like There Will Be Blood and Dr. Strangelove aren't ideal, but flashy, special effects-heavy action entertainment with easily translatable, simple themes, i.e. good guys versus bad guys, is the ideal product choice. And the bigger foreign markets get, the more this trend will continue. Most character brands such as James Bond, Spider-Man, and Superman are already established images. You don't need a complex plot to recognize them. You need a Walther PPK, a web shooter, and a red cape. People recognize this image. They're instantaneously pulled into the story and can now kick back, watch a load of stuff blow up, and enjoy the ride. In other words, the brands translate across cultures through visuals alone. Ever wonder why superhero movies are everywhere these days? Because they are simple images with simple themes that anyone of any culture can understand. They won't challenge your preconceptions or improve your life in any way, but they go down as easily as the film equivalent of Big Mac and fries. Bad for your health, but damn does it taste good. How movies are marketed has also become an issue. Social media has changed the game more than ever, with a movie living or dying by how it is received on social media. In a few minutes, everyone can know how much your film stinks, and bad reviews can go viral. In the past, a bad movie could stay hidden long enough to make its returns, relying solely on the revenue from the weekly cinema goer who picks a random movie market. But that market is now all but dead. This has only increased the risk of movie making more than ever, and thus the need for studios to predict and control the outcome is at an all-time high. So today, the first question asked by movie studios is not whether the film is good, but can it actually be sold? But this isn't the long-term definition of sold, it's the short-term definition. That being the opening weekend. Because of how movie financing works, a movie needs to double its costs and grosses to even break even. Films cost hundreds of millions to make, plus even more hundreds of millions to market and distribute. A tentpole blockbuster like Iron Man 3, for instance, would have to gross over $750 million just to land on its feet. Spoiler, it did. To make matters worse, movies have a crazy drop-off weekend to weekend, and the vast majority of profits are made on the opening weekend. Sure, occasionally, home runs like Avatar come along that eat weekend grosses over and over and over again. But by and large, movies have a punishingly narrow window of 1 to 2 weekends to see big returns or go bust. So it's essential new movies have the widest appeal possible. That means recognizable characters, simple plots, and not too much dialogue, at least not of the complex or intelligent variety. But there's another reason studios want as much predictable revenue as possible. Today, movies aren't just competing with other movies, they're competing with books, Netflix, YouTube, social media, video games. They're competing with your time and all the other things you have to spend it on. Short-form entertainment such as Instagram or YouTube are eating traditional methods of entertainment alive. Film is no exception. This means you have to sell your audience something you already know they are going to want. How do you know what that is? Well, you simply find something that already worked extremely well in another medium such as books and turn it into a movie franchise, i.e. let's make a movie about the boy wizard. So, to briefly summarise, largely due to the financial constraints of movie making, the need for huge and instant returns, and a modern environment where everything competes for consumers' attention every second, modern filmmaking has become a wellspring of repetitive, trite garbage that pushes whatever talent is in the industry into narrow, predictable, yet marketable storytelling avenues, and then fine-tunes the product for mass appeal mediocrity. One sort of positive side effect is that more and more top talent flees to Netflix and HBO, where they feel more rewarded and creatively free. Which is why the quantity of top quality TV series has skyrocketed over the past 2 decades. But it's a double-edged sword for film lovers because movie studios are left with second stringers making second string movies, meaning less viewer engagement, which means less money and more crap. And so on. It's a snake eating its own tail. Makes sense? Good. Now, let's move on to storytelling. And this is where everything really falls apart. For a story to have wide-reaching financial success, it needs to be easily understandable. One way to do this is to have it use a simple, familiar story structure that has been proven to work. Though there are exceptions, the vast majority of modern blockbusters can be boiled down to a couple of simple, self-evident, and utterly worthless messages. A team is stronger than an individual. If you believe in yourself, you will succeed. Movies will drape their story in other themes to provide diversity between releases, some of which are worthwhile, but when you really analyse them, they simply repeat these same messages that we've been repeatedly told and have internalized since childhood. We already know these axioms to be true. We don't need 20 movies a year to remind us. Within these overarching themes, writers usually follow predictable 3-act structures that screenwriting experts such as Sid Field have been promoting and making money off for years. There's nothing new here. They're all largely rewritten and simplified versions of Aristotle's Poetics and Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. Whether or not it has any artistic merit is irrelevant. What matters is that it sells. The 3-act structure goes something like this. Act 1. Person is in the ordinary world, feels X, receives invites to adventure or a challenge, leaves the ordinary world. Act 2. Encounters obstacle or enemy, fails multiple times, keeps trying, fails. Things are at their very worst. Act 3. Comes up with a new plan, rallies his strength, overcomes obstacle and/or enemy, feels why, returns to the ordinary world, forever changed. If you really think about it, most of Hollywood's output can be boiled down to this structure. Even if they play around with the way the acts are presented or the timeline, it's all there. This, alongside the repetitive childish themes, brings us back to Scorsese's point. What's not there is revelation, mystery, or genuine emotional danger. Nothing is at risk, the pictures are made to satisfy a specific set of demands, and they are designed as variations on a finite number of themes. This is a more intellectual way of saying predictable, meaningless crap. The point is perhaps reinforced when breakout movies like Black Panther come along and are heralded as some sort of divine, seminal achievement. Representation aside, was it? It followed the same simple structure, had the same simple ideas, and any other interesting concepts such as the responsibility of those in power to their brothers without, weren't explored in any detail. They were icing on a simple cake, hinting at complexity, but offering nothing even approaching substance. Don't get me wrong, some of cinema's greatest movies exclusively use the hero's story, from The Matrix to Fight Club, but in these examples and others the writers added complexity and depth through intelligent dialogue and unexpected plot devices. A Fight Club especially takes the hero's journey and turns it upside down, so much so that, spoiler alert, the protagonist turns out to be a schizophrenic terrorist leader. What I despise is when writers rely solely on a pre-established structure with little added depth or complexity to make a movie. Yet, this isn't even the worst sin in Hollywood's playbook. No, that award goes solely to one thing: bathos. Forever shall its name be cursed. 18th century poet Alexander Pope coined the phrase bathos in his essay, Peribathos, or The Art of Singing in Poetry. Pope used bathos to describe a technique where a poet would suddenly change from serious to trivial for the sake of making the reader laugh, even if it were at the expense of the poem itself. Pope despised this, as he felt it debased poetry and prevented the art form and topic of the poem from becoming something greater and more transcendent. Thank God then that he didn't live to see modern movies, because bathos is their favourite writing tool of all. It's incredible today how many movies, no matter their subject matter, function almost equally or even more so as comedies. They are riddled with jokes, often easily translatable visual gags, as if the writers and directors are terrified that the audience might take their story seriously for a second. One example that immediately comes to mind is in Avengers Infinity War, where Bruce Banner trips over like a Looney Tunes cartoon in what is the build-up to a save the universe or we're all doomed battle. That's like Michael Corleone competing his satanic journey into becoming the new Godfather, only to cap it off with him loudly breaking wind as he renounces the devil. The subject matter is extremely serious, but who cares? Here's a joke. Why is bathos so popular? Because humour sells. More accurately, humour sells better than art. It's a sad truth, but most of your friends and family are much more likely to go see a film if you recommend it to them as, "It was funny, it gave me a lot of laughs, it's a great day out for the whole family," rather than, "The cinematography was exceptional, the acting was moving, and the story was gritty." Cast your mind back to the recent releases you've seen from the Hollywood movie machine, and you'll find it hard not to find examples where bathos is running wild, often at the expense of the pathos, that is, the sincerity that evokes pity or sadness, necessary to a moving scene. And if you don't believe me, just consider that the average Marvel movie shoots out a joke every 1 minute, 18 seconds on average. Considering that they're the benchmark most other studios want to hit, and that their parent company Disney is replicating their efforts in over 20 movies releasing this year, it's going to be a great year for undercut sincerity and weak emotional integrity. This approach is really nailed home by a quote from Buffy the Vampire Slayer creator and Avengers director Joss Whedon, who said, "Make it dark, make it grim, make it tough, but then, for the love of God, tell a joke." I don't have a problem with humour in non-comedy films. In fact, I love it when it's done with class. But I'm a strong believer that it has to come naturally or it just doesn't work. And it has to be appropriate to the tone of the scene. Tarantino has a particular knack for this. The opening scene of Reservoir Dogs in the diner is speckled with funny lines, overwhelmingly about dicks and wanting to shoot each other. And it works, because it's just a bunch of criminals shooting the shit over breakfast. Even though they're about to pull off a jewel heist, you can imagine a similar conversation happening in a similar situation with similar people in real life. In Pulp Fiction, when Vincent shoots Marvin in the face, even though they were having a serious conversation about Jules' retirement, the comedy originates from a slip of the finger, an accident, but importantly, it's one that seems completely natural and appropriate to these two low-budget hitmen for hire. The way Vincent says, "Oh man, I shot Marvin in the face," is 100% befitting to his irreverent character. and it doesn't in any way detract from the film's more serious underlying message. Whereas there's nothing more out of place and jarring than protagonists making cheap jokes during an intense knife fight to the death. Let me paint another picture for you to demonstrate how bathos can ruin an otherwise great film. Take 1987's Predator, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger. It's a blockbuster, so it's comparable to today's fare, and perhaps one of the most quotable and beloved action movies of all time. Predator tells the story of a team of commandos who find themselves being hunted and killed by a mysterious alien warrior. The movie is filled with one-liners, little notes of humour, and irreverence from the characters early on. But here's the thing, as soon as they start being slaughtered by a mysterious invisible alien, the characters cut that shit out. Just like you, I, or any sane human being would. In fact, one of the most memorable lines from this part of the movie is, "There's something out there waiting for us, and it ain't no man. We're all gonna die." Hardly a side splitter, but entirely appropriate to the new mood and events of the story. This sincerity and adherence to the appropriate tone leads us to take the story and the situation the characters are in more seriously. We see the villain as more of a threat, and it makes the final showdown all that more thrilling. The result? The creature has become an indelible mainstay in popular culture, despite the fact it's only been in one good movie. To hammer this point home, the series was rebooted in 2018, filled with inappropriate bathos and irreverence from the characters throughout, and was a commercial and critical failure. Go figure. Even when Hollywood is shown in consumer trends that bathos isn't necessary to succeed, they try it anyway. Can you imagine if in Titanic, Kate Winslet, listening to Leo DiCaprio's frozen, impassioned final words, told him to chill? I don't think it would have quite the same effect. The conclusion from this is that not only are movies simplistic and repetitive, but they're devoid of the necessary resonance to make them achieve any kind of meaning or engagement. Sure, you might enjoy the spectacle, you might even enjoy the jokes, but at what cost? Because there's little more damaging to the art of cinema than bathos and the abusive reliance on repetitive themes and structures. Except perhaps how politically minded executives are cramming so-called progressive political agendas into movies, but that's a whole other topic. On that note, all I have to say is, if you have an agenda, don't shoehorn it in at the expense of the story. Anyhow, Ricky Gervais is already doing an absolute sterling job of making a laughingstock out of the woke Hollywood elite, so I don't have to. I could also drone on about CGI versus practical effects, but I won't, because the story comes first. The orcs in Peter Jackson's The Hobbit may have looked like rubber sex toys, but at least it was redeemed by Tolkien's timeless story and Martin Freeman's acting. Because whether you like it or not, stories are a form of communication. And they are, in some way, shape or form, edifying. They are trying to teach you something valuable. But what do most modern movie stories teach us? The answer is absolutely nothing. They're shallow fun that goes nowhere and leaves you with nothing of value. Sure, it might feel like a rush to see the Avengers band together to defeat the villain as Alan Silvestri's music swells. But what are you left with? What did you feel? What did you think? Or were you just left wondering what will happen to these corporate brands next? This isn't to say you can't make a large budget blockbuster interesting. The Dark Knight is about resolving who you think you are versus who you need to be. The Empire Strikes Back is about how the evil we see within others is just as much inside us. The Lord of the Rings is about how meekness, sacrifice, and brotherly fellowship can overcome the vices of power and greed. We can't help but be affected by these themes when they're well told, as they are in these examples. But most modern movies don't do this. They're just commercials for the next revenue-generating, insert studio brand here adventure. They're promoting a brand that, once popular enough, once enough people have been to the cinema and experienced, as Scorsese said, a visual theme park ride, they can be turned into an actual theme park ride that can make even more money. So skip your next trip to see Avengers Part 10 and go and read War and Peace instead. You'll get much more out of it. Thanks for watching. Unfortunately, I don't have a blockbuster budget, so if you enjoyed this video then please consider supporting me on Patreon to help me to continue to make these videos. You'll find a link in the description. Also, you could get your hands on a first edition signed copy of my new book, Stick a Flag in It, by heading on over to Unbound Publishing, the link's in the description, and pre-ordering your copy today. Thank you.